We are just over a week away from the draft, and looking at the Panthers cornerback room, it looks like they're going to add another body. Will the Panthers add a starting caliber player to that room next week in the draft? We'll talk about it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm right here on the show answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me to get your questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag. And of course, follow me first on Twitter as well at Julian Council. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Just over a week away from the beginning of the 2024 NFL Draft up in beautiful, if you've ever been, Detroit, Michigan. And I cannot wait to find out what the Carolina Panthers are going to do with their picks. What are they going to do at 33, 39, 65, then day 3, what are they going to do at 101, 141, 142, and I believe it's 240 there in round 7. So we are almost there, not quite, but almost there. We've been spending time here on the show talking about tight ends, like yesterday. Will the Panthers take a tight end? And if they do, when will they? Where do you prioritize a tight end when it looks at the needs for the Panthers? We've talked about wide receivers. We've talked about a bunch of positions, linebacker, center. On today's show, let's focus on cornerbacks. Let's look at the outlook of the team right now, as far as the position looks like heading into the draft. And then let's try to identify when the Panthers may take one of those players, where it lists on the list of needs, and also try to figure out who would make sense for the Carolina Panthers if they do indeed take a corner next week in the draft, which I do think they will do. But looking at the outlook here in Carolina first, Jaycee Horn, as we know, a fantastic player for the Panthers. The problem is he's only played in 22 out of a possible 51 games. Has not been able to stay healthy, whether it was a broken foot rookie year, whether it was getting friendly fire and breaking his wrist the next season, to a hip injury also, or rib injury rather, also suffered that season, to last year having a hamstring pop right there, second quarter, first game of the season. We haven't really seen JC out on the field enough to feel comfortable about his long-term prognosis here in Carolina, being that he will be someone who is worth investing in long-term, whether it be just 1 year at the 5th-year option, and then even past in a 4, maybe 5-year deal, paying him top of the market cornerback money. I don't feel comfortable with the Panthers doing that right now, just based off of the fact that he has not been healthy. I think he's great. I love the player. I just hate for the player that he has not been out there available to play. And I also hate the fan that likes to trash the player who's not intentionally getting hurt for always being hurt. And these are the same people who did the exact same thing to Christian McCaffrey, wanted him gone, and now turn around and whine and moan and wish that Christian McCaffrey was still a Carolina Panther. So understand, if you're someone who hates Jaycee Horn for always getting injured, you can be frustrated by it, but you're no more frustrated than he is, and then the team that actually puts that on the line every single Sunday is that he's not out there to play. If you're one of those people and he turns it around, I don't want to hear from you. Don't pretend to be a fan then and love Jaycee Horn. Don't be fickle like that. Support the guy and try to hope for the best. And I support him. I hope he can be healthy. But you have to understand the reality of the situation is he has not been healthy, and the Panthers cannot plan for him to be in their long-term plans based off of what he's done so far, which is why right now, sitting here recording this on April 16th, I have a hard time agreeing with the Panthers potentially exercising that 5th-year option. I've got to see it for one season. And with that being said, the Panthers have to think to themselves, if there's one more year left on this rookie deal, I don't know how comfortable we can be. I know it's a new regime in a way, Dan was already here. You have Brant Tillis coming over. Of course, Dave Canales is going to have some sort of say, you would imagine. And of course, the owner, David Tepper, who says he's out in the shadows, is still there lurking and will insert whatever opinion he has, especially for what would be a fairly significant investment, giving Jaycee Horn a fifth-year option if that's what they decide to do at the beginning of next month in May. But right now, I don't think you can plan for him to be your long-term corner out there as really the top corner on the roster, which kind of leads me to believe that the Panthers really need to be looking for a cornerback next week in the draft that can step in and start this season potentially opposite of JC. And then if JC goes down again, can step into that role as the top corner on this roster, pending what the Panthers decide to do either later on in the draft or early on in the draft or really next season during the offseason. Dane Jackson, he comes over from Buffalo where he was a spot starter, started a couple games last year, was really a big-time starter for them as far as just games started back in 2022 when Tre'Davious White went down with an injury, and that was really his story up in Buffalo. Dane Jackson was the third corner this past season, really last couple of seasons, and been a solid player. His numbers are just okay. He's a former 7th-round pick out of Pitt, who Dan Morgan was banging on the table for the Panthers, not the Panthers, but yeah, for the Panthers to bring here, but really for the Bills to draft back when he was working in Buffalo under Brandon Beane. He's now here in Carolina with an opportunity to be the starter. Looking at his contract, if he's not good this year, they can move on. No harm, no foul outside of just what would have been a foul season if that's how things play out for him. And I hope that that's not going to be the case. I think with the experience entering into really the prime of his career, at least what should be the prime of his career, the Panthers should get some quality snaps out of Dane Jackson this season, whether he's the primary starter or the third corner. They have a guy who can help them, who has experience that is absolutely needed after the Panthers traded away Dante Jackson to Pittsburgh so they could get Deontay Johnson to help out the offense. Troy Hill, he's back once again, likely as of this recording and before the draft, penciled in as the starter at nickel. You would think Carolina's going to try to bring in some more players. You have Deshaun Jameson, you have DiCaprio Bootle, both players that are about 5'10", sort of undersized, more they would be kind of nickel type corners, and they can compete and maybe develop into that role with Troy Hill being back as the veteran. It was a needed signing after the way he played last year. He was healthy, and that's something the Panthers really should be evaluating. Dante Jackson was healthy last year, but they felt like at this point in time, it was time to move on from him, and they were able to get a receiver in return, and that was absolutely something that was needed with Deontay Johnson coming over here to Carolina. Now looking at with Troy Hill, you still have him back as a veteran, but you have to be thinking ahead and want to know, all right, who on the roster can potentially fill that spot and be the starter, but also what are our options potentially next season in free agency? And you have to imagine while they're focused on the draft, they're also projecting out. A smart organization would do that. And hoping that this organization is now becoming a smart one, they would be projecting out to next year and looking at the position and thinking this player may be available, this player may be franchise tagged, or this may be a trade candidate. You would imagine Carolina's looking ahead, but also looking at what they have right now on the roster. And what they have right now, at least to me, is a cornerback one who's really good, but you cannot depend on him to be healthy. Another corner who comes in who has experience, but there's still questions of whether he can be that high-level player you need there, and if he is even an upgrade at all from Dante Jackson from a year ago. And then an aging player who gave you a lot of good snaps, Troy Hill, and then some younger guys like Deshaun Jameson and DiCaprio Bootle, who, when called upon last year, they really did step up and help this defense maintain and not completely fall apart as you would expect when you saw the amount of talent that left the sideline last year due to injury here in Carolina on the defensive side of the ball. So the quarterback outlook to me is they need to get one next week in the draft. The problem, as we talked about yesterday with tight end, is this is not the only need. And there are other position groups I look at as being a greater need, and that this is a rebuild. So the Panthers don't necessarily have to check off every single box in the draft in this offseason. But damn, you would like to see him do it. We'll talk about whether the Panthers will take a corner on day 2, because I feel like that's the time you got to take one if you want to have someone to come in and immediately be an impact player. Here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. This next segment is brought to us by our sponsor, BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? And if it were me, maybe I just go out for a nice walk or just sleep in a little bit, go play some golf, get outside. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, get BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. The Carolina Panthers need to get a corner next week in the draft. They also kind of need to get a tight end. And I think they need to get another wide receiver. And I think they need to get a center. And I wouldn't mind if they got a linebacker. And hell, they got a safety, a defensive lineman, all those position groups, wouldn't mind it. So in short, the Panthers have a lot of needs heading into the draft next week in Detroit. And that's why Dan Morgan and Brent Tillis and everyone else there in the scouting department and front office get paid the big bucks here in the National Football League. Now, can they turn this thing around in one offseason? I doubt it, but they don't have to do it right away. My hope is after last year's catastrophe of a 2-15 season, Frank Reich in and out in 11 games, my hope is that no matter how things go, unless it's just a complete unmitigated disaster yet again, that Dan Morgan's going to be back next year, that Dave Canales will be back next year, Brent Tillis, that they're going to see this rebuild through. And they, meaning David Tepper, will Daddy Warbucks be patient enough to see things through? He says he's been patient in the business world. Football-wise, I do think that Matt Rule should have been fired, and fans wanted him fired earlier than he was fired. So maybe he was a little bit more patient about that. Frank Reich, yeah, I get it. It had to happen. It's not like he's ever had a coach that he kept Ron Rivera for a year longer. This is not me defending David Tepper, because if y'all have been watching or listening to the show for a while, you know how I feel about our Yinzer owner here in Carolina. It's just maybe he has been a little bit more patient than we give him credit for. The problem is, though, at some point, you got to see things through. And now you have 7 different head coaches in 7 different seasons, including interims, which may be a little disingenuous, but a lot of people have gone out there and counted it, and it's hard to ignore that fact. Just pointing out the turnover here in Carolina, you want to see things through. And the best way to do that is, of course, to be able to get players in here to allow the owner to want to see things through. And that starts next week with the draft. Dan Morgan's come out and said that they want to be a team that builds to the draft. And that's what all the good teams in the NFL try to do. You don't want to be having to pay big money in free agency. Certainly, there are certain positions of value and certain players that are worth it. And we've seen the Panthers go out and spend the money on Damian Lewis, especially on Robert Hunt, both guard spots that were a turnstile last year due to just the level of play and also the health status of those guys playing at left guard and at right guard. It was necessary for the Panthers to do that. But it's also necessary for the Panthers to go out there and find some young, cheap talent who can come in and can compete and impact the team right away. And the best way to do that in this year's draft, because you'll have a first-round pick, is on day 2 at pick 33, 39, and 65 as it currently stands. Now, I've seen multiple mock drafts now from ESPN suggesting the Panthers will trade back from 33 in order to get more picks in day 2, which you could look at and you could argue that as being a good thing. We have sat here and we discussed, especially on yesterday's show and in the past as well, the last couple of weeks, just ranking what the needs are. We've talked about wide receiver being a big need and corner. At least I've said that. Wide receiver, corner, center, edge. If the Panthers get 4 picks, currently only have 3, to get 4 picks by trading back in day 2, they can hit off wide receiver. They can get a center. They can get a corner, and they can also get an edge rusher. 4 players that can come in and hopefully be impact players for them in 2024, and really players that they can build around for the future. That's the important thing to understand when looking at this roster right now. Corner, you hope that Jaycee Horn can be someone you can build with, and you would think the same thing about Dane Jackson as well, coming in off his rookie deal in Buffalo and likely a starter depending on how things work out in the draft next week. Same case when you look at linebacker, you want to find someone who can come in and potentially be a future player, because Shaq Thompson's likely not going to be around after the season, and then Josie Jewell's not long for here. Safety, all 3 players currently there: Jordan Fuller, Alex Cook. Alex Cook is in there as well, but not him. But Jordan Fuller. God, I forgot the guy from Cincinnati's name off the top of my head. But you also have Xavier Woods. With those 3 guys, Nick Scott, that's his name from Cincinnati. They could be gone after this year. They're all free agents. So the Panthers got to look around the roster and think of finding some players that can come in when next week in the draft that can be players that can build around for the future. So will they take a corner in draft 2 or in day 2 of the draft? Again, 33. That's where I want to see a wide receiver, assuming the Panthers stay at 33. At 39, looking at these mock drafts, if Jackson Powers-Johnson out of Oregon is there, I want him. We'll see how things work out with Corbett. The Panthers have tried with all these free agents, with Paradis, with Elflein, which no one's surprised didn't work out. With Bozeman, it worked, then it didn't. Now they're trying another former free agent signing in Austin Corbett, who's never played center. They're trying him out there at that position just because it seems like they just don't have someone who can play it right now. And Dave Canales, as we know, is a very positive guy. But is that going to be the toxic kind of positivity that he just tells you everything's great when things actually aren't always great? I hope that's not going to be the case. He is someone who's galvanized a fan base. That's great. But I got to see it, Dave, before I really believe that Austin Corbett is the right guy at center for the Panthers, which is why I feel like they need to take a center next week in the draft. And I would like to see that happen in the second round based off of what we were told last week by Jordan Reed from ESPN.com, that the top 4 centers probably not there at 65 in the third round. The Panthers going to need to get someone there in the second round. So that then leaves a corner at pick 65. We talked about yesterday, tight end. Do you take someone like a Jatavion Sanders out of Texas at tight end over getting a starting corner, or do you stick there and get a corner? That's where I would look at maybe the Panthers, other than I feel like the first pick, and this is every single mock draft I've seen, everything that I've seen reported upon about the Panthers and their intentions next week heading into the draft is that they want to address wide receiver early, meaning right off the bat. So 33, if they trade back, whatever their first pick is, expect wide receiver. So after that, we're debating whether it's going to be edge, corner, center, or maybe even tight end as the next pick for the Panthers. As far as this discussion goes, I feel like center should be the next pick. But looking at the latest mock draft coming from Field Yates and Mel Kiper Jr. from ESPN.com, they did a dual mock draft, so they were going back and forth from between their picks. So Field would pick, then Mel would pick, yada, yada, yada. You saw it. He had the Panthers. Field Yates did have the Panthers, taking Mike Sanderstrill from Michigan with pick 52. This also was the Panthers trading back from 33 and getting an extra pick in the third round and then going back to 52. Then at 39, that was their first pick. They took a wide receiver, and we've seen this one pick before. They took Ladd McConkey out of Georgia. If they take Mike Sanderstrill, I don't necessarily dislike that pick. I think he's a good player. He fills in as a nickel. And if you look at the rosters, we just pointed out a minute ago, JC's a boundary corner. You also have Dane Jackson on the outside, and then in the inside in this slot at that nickel spot, right now you have Troy Hill. Sanderstill could come in, could play that. Jameson can play it. DiCaprio Boodle can play it. They would have plenty of options at nickel and a pretty damn sure tackler. And I'm sure someone's going to then go back and point out how he missed a tackle in the Rose Bowl, as if guys don't ever miss tackles. But Mike Sanderstill is a really good player, went from wide receiver to corner and became one of the best nickel corners in college football. And that's just to point out, I've been told another receiver who the Panthers may be interested in, who played at South Carolina, who didn't do anything for 4 years and all of a sudden played well. Oh, that's because he changed positions. Mike Sanderstill got to college, changed positions, became a starter for multiple years, and was a part of one of the best defenses in college football last year and won a national championship, and now is expected to be a second-round pick. Like, that is a guy I would be interested in potentially here in Carolina. The thing, though, that the Panthers got to figure out, are they focused on the traits or the talents? Are they wanting a nickel? Are they wanting an outside corner? What exactly do they want to get out of the cornerback position? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. Killer last-minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without hidden fees. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. And it's baseball season all across the country right now, whether you're going to a minor league game or a major league game. Y'all hit up Game Time if you're getting some last-minute tickets. Got our Reds host who does that all the time, lives by the ballpark, and he decides, hey, I'm going to go to see a game tonight because they got some great deals. Go do that over at Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. What exactly would the Carolina Panthers be looking for in a corner that they take next week in the draft? Are they looking for someone to come in and to play in the nickel spot, or are they looking for an outside boundary corner to compete with Dane Jackson and potentially create a future pairing on the outside opposite of Jaycee Horn? What are they trying to find? And this is one of the things where I'm wondering about Dan Morgan and this coaching staff. I was asked about this, and this is different when I'm talking about than what I was asked on Friday during the weekly Friday mailbag. At me, DM me at Julian Council, by the way, to get your questions in for this week's edition of the show. But I was asked by someone if the Panthers will continue to only select players who they have met with as far as their top 30 visits or in person with. And I told them that in all likelihood, that's probably what's going to happen. I think the majority of teams do that. There are going to be the cases where the teams have never talked to the player, but they've certainly done their vetting. You would hope they've done their vetting. And it is a little odd that you wouldn't spend some face time of an individual who you're going to employ, because basically it's a job interview. A little weird to me that that would happen, but I would expect Panthers are going to continue to go out there and take players that they bet with. The one thing I have a question about with the Panthers is, are they going to continue to take players when they look at their traits compared to their production? Like, are they going to be traits over talent? Because last year, looking at the draft, Bryce Young, production, of course. Now the traits, as far as like the physical traits, weren't necessarily there. And they're never going to be there. Quite honestly, we know that. He's just genetics. Bryce Young's just not going to be a big guy. He's always been small, and he knows how to play as a smaller player. And especially, he's trying to learn at this level how to play as a small quarterback. We don't need to harp on that, but we understood they took the talent more so than they weren't worried about the traits. And we see what CJ Stroud did. We haven't really seen a lot of Anthony Richardson, and we haven't seen enough of Will Levis to really look at those guys and say for sure, oh, well, we've seen enough of CJ Stroud, I think, so far. But the other two, I don't know. We don't know yet. But then you look at the second and third round, the Panthers, they went with a guy in Jonathan Mingo who didn't really produce in college, but he had the traits they were looking for and didn't do anything last year in the NFL. Then they also looked at a guy in DJ Johnson, who's an older player, and they looked at his traits and looked at his production. Wasn't all that great. Honorable mention, Pac-12, okay. And he came in and he did nothing. So it's interesting to me, and you can look in Chandler Zavala. He played a lot. He did not play well last year. We didn't even see Jamie Robinson after being a 2-time first-team All-ACC player, starting off his career in the SEC with South Carolina. So you can point that out as well, and that's fair to say. But especially the premium picks there in day 2, they went traits over like the talent and the production. I'm wondering, are the Panthers going to do that again this year? And when you look at the traits of some of the corners that would be available in round 2 and round 3, a lot of them are smaller guys that are either just going to be seen as only nickels or can play inside and outside, with the preference likely being inside. Like Ennis Rakestraw was really good at Mizzou this past year. He has some injury issues. He's 5'11", not the longest player, but physical, plays hard. A kind of guy that I think can help this team, absolutely. Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky, also a smaller player who would likely fit in as a nickel. Kamari Lassiter, according to Dane Brugler and his The Beast breakdown, he's some of the teams that solely look at him as being a nickel. He has a pedigree coming from UGA, which is great. Max Melton, DJ James, Max Melton out of Rutgers, DJ James out of Auburn. They're also smaller guys. The guy I'm looking for when I'm kind of asking, are you going to be traits over talent, or really, what are you looking for in a corner overall? Are you looking for a nickel, or are you looking for an outside guy? I look at TJ Tampa, who Pro Football Network, they did their latest mock. They had the Panthers taking him 39th overall. I look at him as somebody who fits what they've wanted in corners over the last couple of seasons. And maybe the philosophy is changing. They brought in Deshaun Jameson and DiCaprio Boodle last year. Now, Jameson is someone who they got after roster cut downs and brought him on the active roster. DiCaprio Boodle, someone they assigned during the middle of the season. And those guys are about 5'10". Not great size, but they play hard, which is important. You got to have some depth pieces and guys who can also play special teams, which is what Deshaun Jameson really was brought in to do until he had to be called on to play once the injuries kind of piled up there at corner this past season. I'm just wondering if it makes more sense to go out there and get a longer player like Jaycee Horn and like they wanted at CJ Henderson and Stephon Gilmore when he was here. Maybe they still bring in Stephon Gilmore. That's something that could factor into what the Panthers do. Now, I'm now wondering if Gilmore, who's still unavailable as of this recording, if he's just going to wait until close to the camp and not waste his time during OTAs, if he's just going to wait until the end of July, early August to decide where he's going to go, or if he's ready to say it now. Whether he is or not, the Panthers still need to find someone who they can bring in to be here for at least the next 4 years. Because I mentioned the names of Jameson and Boodle. Those guys, this could be their last year. And same thing with Jaycee Horn. Could be his last year. Dane Jackson could be his only year in Carolina. They need to find some long-term answers. And I look at a player like TJ Tampa out of Iowa State. He has the length. He had a 79-inch wingspan. And I was looking at the rest of these guys. It was like 74, 75. I saw 72. He's truly 6 foot tall, almost 6'1". He truly is 6 feet. He has the longest arms, did great in the Big 12 the last couple of years in a conference that's always been known to pass the ball a lot. He did a good job against and coverage of pass deflections, a couple of interceptions, was solid in the run game. That's someone I'm looking at. If they're going to take a corner, especially when they're looking for someone who can play on the outside, which I think that's what they should be focused on. If the guy can't play on the outside, moving the inside. And that also, of course, takes certain level of skill as well. Don't want to downplay it, but especially playing on the outside, that can be difficult. And TJ Tampa is someone who Dane Prugler believes can play on the outside and turn into a plus starter. And the Panthers need someone who can come in and be a plus starter for them down the road, if not immediately. And I think TJ Tampa out of Iowa State would make a lot of sense if that's what they're looking for. If they're not and they want a nickel, then Mike Sandestro, even if he's 5'9", small guy, that's what you should be looking for. Or maybe Ennis Rakestraw or Andrew Phillips, Kamari Lassiter, Max Melton, DJ James. Those are just the names I look at that have the second, third round grade, according to Dane Brugler of The Athletic and in his Beast breakdown. So we'll see. What do they want? Traits, talent, an outside corner, a slot corner. Like, what are you looking for? We'll find out soon enough as the draft is next week. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all, subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where I'll be back with you again on Friday to answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions. So either at me or DM me to get those questions into me right now. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole as always. And forever, y'all, keep pounding. And I'll talk to y'all on Wednesday.